Hey y'all! Welcome back to my video series responding to, discussing, talking about points that hit my attention during the latest Critical Role episodes. This one will be discussing episode 11, Making Merry, which is, or Make Merry, not making, Make Merry, which was confirmed to be the finale of the first arc of the Soldier's Table. And we did get confirmation that the next table we are switching to, as of this week, will be the Seeker's Table, following Octus, Taisha, Julian, and Valus. So we got a bit of an extra long cold open, kind of setting us where we are, and making a little bit more clarification on my point that I've noticed in the cold opens for the Schemers Table about that we are not, in fact, I thought at first we were like keeping time consistent and checking in. Then I noticed the Schemers tables were all one, like within the one day, and now we have confirmation all the different tables are on different timelines. We've had actually, the Schemers and the Soldiers may be on a similar time level. I think it's been about 3 to 4 days for the Soldiers. I think we're coming into their, say, the long rested, twice in the woods, once on the road. They may be a little bit. I think the Soldiers are our furthest ahead in time. We have confirmation our Seekers are now 3 days out from Dol Makyar, and our Schemers are still the same one day everybody left. At the very end of that day. But it's been a day. So we get a little bit of some character moments of like where everybody is headspace and how they're interacting with the people around them. We get the little bit, the one that caught my ear was Taisha talking about being more herself in the discomfort of being outside of the comforts of the city, which is a bit of an interesting one for me, just because we know the motherly side of herself that comes out when she's around her kids, and how that, while I'm not saying that that's an act that she puts on, I find it very telling that Taisha feels that's still less of her true self, and maybe part of the reason that she's more comfortable and more willing to leave for extended periods of time. It's not, I'm home as much as I can, but I go off when I'm needed, kind of how Veth ended up at the end of Campaign 2. But Taisha's more like, no, I am in my best element when I am out in the world. I still care about the people that are here, but that is my home. Which I can see being a very prolonged character conflict that might not have a resolution. This kind of being pulled both ways. And it has been interesting in seeing, it'll be interesting seeing Abria explore that side of playing a mother character, versus, and I hesitate to even bring it up because I know I am already behind the next 2 episodes that have dropped for the second season of Project Ghostlight's Private Nightmares. But for those that want to see a bit more of Luis, Abria, and Alex, they are in a Vampire the Masquerade game that actually Alex is running on the Project Ghostlight YouTube channel. The Masquerade campaign is called Private Nightmares, and Abria is also playing a mother with a very interesting relationship to motherhood and family in that game. Though, of course, not for all people, not for all ages. Vampire the Masquerade does tend to delve a bit more into darker and serious takes on darker and serious topics. But also, sidebar point of comparison, I have a feeling I'm going to be thinking of that game a lot as Brennan and Alex together work on describing physically what it feels like to be undead, because there are a lot of descriptions that are, if not word for word, are in very much the spirit of some of the ways you can hear some storytellers for vampire games describe the uncanniness that is being a kindred in those games. So just find an interesting and fun little point of connection there. I also enjoyed some of the bit of world building we got describing the original purpose of the pass and the expanded purpose of the pass. Specifically because I know this is a trap I sometimes fall into as a DM or as a writer, as a story builder, when you think of like a historical event that sort of defines the concept of your world. Like the concept of Ahriman is this is a world post the gods have died. To like get people hooked into the story. But not all of the world building centers on the time the gods died and after that. There is still tangible history left from before times, from before the gods died, that aren't even necessarily connected to the gods themselves. Like, this was just the pass between the allied human and dwarven kingdoms to move soldiers to possibly have to face some of the orcish invasions or to try to invade the orcish homelands, which, while it obviously had its ties, the conflict may have had its root in godly conflicts, the pass itself was a very mundane thing. So I think I kind of liked noting that as a reminder to myself and to other world builders that even if there is a specific historical moment or turning point in your world that sort of your story is framed around, to not neglect parts of your world that predate that, and especially if they are only tangentially related to that. You don't have to overdo it, but when you start exploring a part of the world that would have had these physical, tangible things, to remember that they're there, to think of how the history shaped that world. And speaking of history, we get the twice desecrated shrine, for want of a better term for it. We get the broken statues of the dwarven gods, then painted with graffiti, not defaming the gods, but being contrite and asking them to come back. But we find that whatever shrine had been desecrated during the Shapers' War had originally been a sacred druidic site to one of the primordials, which, for those of us that are coming into Campaign 4 off the heels of Campaign 3, probably pricked up our ears as much as mine did with the whole in Exandria, the primordials being what predated the gods. We do know the Shapers are not the actual creators of the physical world of Ahriman. We do have multiple references to things that are older. However, the whole there was a war between the gods and primordials bit of history from Exandria, if something similar to that exists in Ahriman, I was scratching my head trying to remember what history of the primordials we have so far been given. If that war happened, it would have been very messy in Ahriman, because the other thing we get as the various characters make their checks at this site is that Tahani, the Earth Titan, was the wife of Rajna, the dwarven goddess. So we're not talking two separate and distinct entities that may have coexisted and then one eventually fought the other. We're talking these were intertwined groups of beings in which, depending on the mythology you look at, you can sometimes see between different groups of these super powerful beings or different tribes of gods, sometimes warring with each other, sometimes intermingling. And it does give a lot of good drama. And also, we see the primordials seem to have been revered by druids, presumably by the Old Path. We know the gods did eventually try to drive the Old Path into extinction. So clearly there was not purely good vibes between these two groups. It'd be very interesting. I think I'm going to very much enjoy following the Seekers group, just trying to pick apart what was the mess of the various periods throughout the history of Ahriman. And then we get our extended sequence in the aviary. Post title sequence, we actually end up back at the schemer's table, which, as a sidebar, and I feel sort of my confirmation of a guess I had made after watching the previous episode, that what we saw as the end of episode 10 was not the end of the soldiers filming that particular day, based on the fact that it seemed like Brennan's both throw to break and throw to the end were edited in afterwards. And I said I forgot to check for a cooldown. Turns out there wasn't one after episode 10, so I am very much hanging my hat on. And they did mention in the cooldown for this episode that it was a monster filming session. So I think the back half of the episode with the soldiers was actually filmed as a part of the same episode that the battle from episode 10 was, but it just got too long, or it didn't work with the editing, so they had these 2 extra scenes. They filmed extra long cold open, an extra long scene with the Seekers, and split off the end of the soldiers to create this sort of transitional episode, would be my theory. Obviously, I can only see what result we got. I can only guess to the behind the scenes reasoning, but I personally like this, and it does help keep the episodes within a manageable length for me to be able to watch, jot down notes, and respond to before the next episode. Theoretically, I promise nothing about staying on track, though I am very much incentivized to do so for the Seekers table. And I keep glancing over because, well, I've talked about it enough times, I may as well. I had mentioned a couple of times working on my own Pincushion plush. He's not finished yet, and he probably won't be before the episode airs because I won't be able to get the buttons for his eyes until Saturday. But I do love that the process of making a crocheted plush meant that yesterday my desk was just covered in various bits of Fox, which I can only imagine was about what it would have looked like assembling the real Pincushion. But yeah, I'd been saying long enough that I was going to make myself a Pincushion plush, and so I figured I may as well show the progress of making the little buddy. Anyway, I've been rambling for 12 minutes, and we haven't passed the intro yet. So, our scene in the aviary, I felt very validated in that in character, the players and characters were reacting the same way I was to the absolute breakneck speed at which everything was happening. So I'm not the only one going, good lord, the Sundered Houses are moving a whole lot faster. They attribute it more to recklessness, almost as if they are sensing there may be some desperation in the Sundered Houses, which would be interesting to see if that is the case, what might be making them so desperate. And then we're talking various plans, who can we reach out to? Can we siphon funds from the museum project to potentially poach some of these mercenaries? Can we, that were the former Revolutionary Guard, can we have some of those guards be moles within the mercenary group? All of which would be interesting threads to follow. And then we get Oris, the merchant, and Celia, his recent paramour, returning from, I had completely forgotten about the party at the Palazzo Divino, so I was going, wait, what party? Why are all the players reacting like they know what's being talked about? But the party that was going to be hosted by the Royces at Palazzo Divinos, which kind of got sniped by the Taconuses, and yeah, very interesting cover with the feast and the faked fairy lights and music, as Oris pointed out. Like, any sorcerer can do this. It was probably a Taconus aping what a Royce sorcerer would have done. And I will say the message about, like, we'll wait for all of our brothers and sisters to join us in fairy message definitely has a darker twist with what Aranessa talked about in one of the cold opens a while ago, with basically the Royces having special access to fairy as an afterlife. So what the general populace seems to have interpreted as the doors to fairy potentially being reopened is very clearly a threat from the Taconuses to any remaining members of House Royce. Their way of covering up, question mark, though it's not a cover that can last long, thanks to, again, the fact that was pointed out is you also killed all the servants, and a lot of them had families that didn't live on the grounds. So it's only going to be a temporary cover, which means you only need it to hide you for so long. Is it until your position is secure enough nobody can call you out on it? Is it until you achieve a specific goal, then it doesn't matter? Be a little interesting to see. And then the fact that the Conuses are trying to cover at all rather than just leaving an empty house and a mystery is also fascinating, trying to get into the headspace of what's going on there and maybe what they were doing, how it might be connected to whatever our soldiers' table was running into with the statues, which we will get to some of my thoughts on those statues. And then we have the tidbit of Oris's family working in ceramics and him having a spell glyph very much like the one Thiazi had. I think I'm catching the implication that the fake spell glyph was at least procured from this family. How knowingly or not remains to be seen. I find it interesting that Brennan points this out to Azune right after Liam mentions the Falcon's Call, as if to warn that potentially Hal has tipped off someone not as allied, or that perhaps somebody who is sympathetic to the cause was manipulated, or seemed rather genuine when he talked about being upset at one of ours being taken in Thiazi's execution when discussing that with Hal. So it'd be interesting to see if Oris is the knife that Brennan's going to twist in our backs, or if Brennan is having a somewhat of an ideological knife twisted in Oris's back, where his family's craft was used to thwart his own interests and beliefs. From there, we move to the wrapping up of things in the basement with discovering the process of what I wrote down as the Taconis dress-up scheme of how to dress and pose their captured paladins. Yikes. I was initially writing questions about, like, okay, but did they get something from Sid before they froze him, or is this a temporary holding scheme until they get him somewhere, unstone him, and get whatever they want? But then we find the scrap of paper, warrior, reach your senses, tell me true, do the dead draw near, which I felt very proud because I wrote down immediately when I heard that, I'm like, divine sense? Which it turned out to be. And interesting that Tayor did not know that his brother was, like him, a paladin. And it would be very interesting for me to find out, and we hopefully get a Sid we can talk to eventually, if it's more just they both grasped on to what their father told them as children, and through divergent paths both found their way to this calling, or if there's almost something in their bloodline that gives them a bit of this divine magic that they can then choose to focus, which would be a bit of an interesting lore, as paladins are one of the classes that basically, unlike a sorcerer, it's not innate magic, it is you chose this path. So it'd be a little interesting to see, again, kind of get a little bit more of, like, what does being a paladin mean to Tayor, to Sid? What is it that gives them this core and belief? And it seems like at this point, even Tayor himself is a bit uncertain. But circling on the statues, on the divine sense, kind of like frozen in that moment of using divine sense, And the group's speculating that perhaps these are sort of meant as sentries, but we know the statues didn't seem to quite react to the presence of a fae or a fiend. Brennan made the note that despite that being one of the things Divine Sense seems for, like there seemed to be a lack of reaction that was confusing, and the word specifically, "Do the dead draw near?" I don't necessarily think of these are intended as sentries, because the Taconuses have this ability to, it seems, control spirits of the dead, but perhaps they have to know the spirit is there to activate that control, or perhaps I have a feeling this is about more than simply knowing if something is around. There's something that they want. They seem to have an interest in these cairns and these barrows, and through the letters we found from the Knights of Ceramai, there seems to be at least an interest in the area of the barrow, specifically of the elven goddess, who is the goddess of life, was the source of the Stone of Night Song. Now, either perhaps they were seeking, these were old letters from seeking the Stone of Night Song, but likely not, as this group at least seemed to be in the know enough to know that Octus should be dead, so they're at least in the know enough about that plan, that the Stone of Night Song, they believed, was already in their grasp. But there may be more they wanted from the actual goddess themselves, and after all, if they already have this influence over death, seeking something in the elven goddess's realm may give them control over life as well. This will be a little terrifying, and I think we are, as we follow the schemers, going to find out a little bit more about what that might be. And then we reunite with the hounds on the very edge of the city. And I like that we have this hint of this is a world that does move on around and without the players. It's not a video game where certain plot lines won't kick off until the players go to a certain area and only progress when players do certain things. I am, as a DM, I'm guilty of running some of my games like this, where the next event in the plot doesn't happen until the players get there. But something both Brennan and Matt do very well, and that we see a little bit of Brennan kind of hinting at the players that he will do here, is that there are other people in this world taking agency. Like very often we ran into in Critical Role where the players stumble across somebody mid-scheme that Matt's just been having them work on in the background. I mean, technically, Campaign 3 was the culmination of an NPC doing that for multiple centuries, including during both of the prior two campaigns. So with this, with the Hound basically telling them of like, go take your brother, get him seen to, we're going to turn our comrade back, and then that's going to kick off our next thing. The Hounds are going to take this investigation. Maybe the players could have chosen to leave Sid a statue and follow along with them, but also, as the Hounds pointed out, it's not really their place as citizens of a foreign nation. So it was just something I appreciated of like, the Hounds and the King of Timony aren't going to sit back and wait for someone to help them take back their kingdom from these people that are getting a foothold in it. Like, they're going to do what they're going to do. And it's not that like, oh, we'll do it without you and then we'll obviously get creamed because you weren't there to save us. These are capable people that also know their own limits. And I just like that realism in the world. And then also had to write down my Brendan Lee Mulligan quote of the episode with hope is not a condition of the world, but one of the soul. So that one's going on the board of quotes to hold on to and possibly drop in a conversation without telling somebody they came from a D&D campaign. And then we have the end of the episode winding down with the various scenes of the camp. We have the Cadigan tyranny moment that is further solidifying my Cadigan is or was a father theory, from how we saw him interact with the doll at Olbid's house to how he very clearly is almost comfortable. I don't know is necessarily the word I would use, but I can't think of a better one at the moment. He is with essentially stepping into this parental role with Tyranny and like trying to walk her through a lesson. And there isn't this hesitation, at least in the time of the conversation, about like, oh, kids never learn the lesson the first time. While conversely, we then see him get extremely uncomfortable with his level up scene of getting away, but that seemed more connected to people in general, whether or not that was specifically connected with his last moment of connection being with Tyranny and this very father figure, mentor figure dynamic. And we get that flashback scene with Teor remembering his father, talking to him and Sid about the stars and their place and that light and strength within them. And I didn't write down the exact phrasing, but to me it very much seemed to imply that the Nama, and I don't know how many other type of beast folk are present in this world, but at least that the Nama predate the gods. They were not one of the races shaped by one of the shapers. Which would be very interesting then, because we still don't know who the seventh shaper was for. We know know of the shaper of the humans, orcs, dwarves, elves, halflings, and gnomes. Seventh one still has not been named, referenced, or given a species that we are aware of. And I had been running under the theory that they may be the shaper of the beast folk, but with this implication that the beast folk may actually in fact predate the shapers. Just again, I wish I'd written down the exact wording, but I was actually cooking dinner at the time. That at least the Nama see themselves as almost like separate and away, and that like there was a part of their history they were hiding, or that the gods wanted silenced. So maybe they're more tied to the primordials, to the old path, and the ways of the druids, rather than to one of the shapers. Which again, given that as far as I can tell, it looks like Travis is playing with the Oath of Glory subclass, would actually be very kind of interesting and almost makes sense that Oath of Glory is one of the paladin subclasses that is less tied to divinity. Now, in 5e, paladins have taken a step back from being specifically tied to gods. The two that tread that line the most closely still being Oath of Devotion, and depending on how you want to look at it, Oath of Redemption. Although, of course, we have in Calamity, we have a very clear example of an Oath of Devotion paladin who wanted nothing to do with the gods. Or, Oath of Redemption, sorry. But we have some specific subclasses that very much tie into potentially stepping very much away from your oath being to any sort of god or religious order. Oath of the Ancients, Oath of the Watchers, while they still have these planar focus, are a bit more nature or extraplanar focused. Oath of the Crown can be very much human, like literally to any sort of crown or leader figure. An Oath of Conquest, an Oathbreaker, but Oath of Glory is, perhaps because of its ties, and I'm not as familiar with the Theros setting, I simply know that's where it's from, and that it draws on a little bit more of the cultural understanding of Greek mythology, or pop cultural understanding of Greek mythology, but looking over the subclass features, it being very much about physical might and inspiring others by being your best self, that it very much can be something internal, like an internal oath, rather than to any external force, which would be very interesting if the Nama as a people predate the gods, and especially if they had to hold whatever origins or stories of their own people like internalized during the time of the gods, if whatever they do feel connected to was more frowned upon in times where the shapers were suppressing the old path. And I believe we got rumors of them like fighting wars against the giants, and I correct me if I'm wrong, we know there are dragons in the history of this world, at least Brennan has mentioned there will be dragons, but we still don't know how the dragons fit in with the Shapers, the Primordials, the Giants, how that's all related, and I don't know, maybe the seventh Shaper is the Shaper of the Dragon? I don't know. We haven't seen any Dragonborn NPCs even. And again, I know I have my conspiracy board theory that the Cormorant Sorceress House is tied to dragons, which until we have proof or denial of that, I'm still going to hold on to. And then the final note I had was on the knife as a vestige of divergence, which I had theorized about and then was immediately clarified in the cooldown. Brennan meant that mechanically rather than lore-wise. So rather than saying, like, this is something that will become important to the lore of this world, like a vestige of divergence was, is rather, this is a magic item that has the potential to grow with you. The idea of the moving from the dormant to awakened to exalted states, like the vestiges from the prior campaigns, which was, I think, my favorite part of those vestiges. Like, the lore of them was cool, but it was that idea of they could grow and become more legendary is, it's something you run into with D&D of, like, yeah, I've got my family's, ancestral sword and +2 longsword. I'll take that instead. I'll, throw the lore-relevant sword away, but the idea of it sort of becoming your iconic weapon and growing with you rather than you outgrowing it. So it'd be very interesting to see mechanically A, what is unlocked, and even more importantly, B, how it is unlocked, because for those familiar with the vestiges from Exandria, or rather for those who aren't, it's not just simple like, oh, you level up and your sword improves. The vestiges of Exandria were, because they were created by gods, were sort of created for a specific type of person to unlock. Either we had Vax's armor in the first campaign that as he grew more connected with the Matron of Ravens and grew to trust her more and accept his role with her more, he unlocked various aspects of versus love that my brain instantly deleted the other means by which the various vestiges grew, because I know we had Vex's Fenthras bow, that I believe was her sort of stepping into being a sort of warden of nature of both attacking but also nurturing, with Fenthras, the trees that it planted, and it having originally been the bow of a Fey warden. The Titanstone knuckles being feats of physical prowess. But that essentially there were traits that the gods that created them cared about. And the more that their wielder embraced those traits, the more sort of, it's almost like you extra attuned to it was almost a better way of thinking it, rather than as you got more powerful it did, is as you and this item grew more in tune with each other, you unlocked more abilities from it. So the question is, given the circumstances by which this knife became magical, being heavily tied to what seems like Tyranny's demonic origin and patron, what is it going to take to, like, is this a magic item that she has to lean into that nature? Because it seemed from her, like, moment, when Brennan asked, where do you go in this memory, and she talks about jealousy, and he says, something in the magic eludes her. Was that because this item will actually grow as she, like, embraces humanity, and because she sort of was a little standoffish and jealous of it, it didn't quite click? Or is it if she rejects humanity and leans into her demonic nature, and it was because she wanted that warmth and connection and humanity that it eluded her? It'd be very interesting and telling to see how this item incentivizes and either leaning into a certain playstyle or creates the roleplay conflict of leaning away from a certain playstyle. So it'll be very, very interesting when we circle back to the soldiers to see how Whitney and Brennan together craft the story of this knife with tyranny. But it seems we'll probably have to wait for a while on that, as we have the other two tables to check in on first. And with next week being our Schemers table, I am very excited for that. It occurs to me I have forgotten in my outros recently to ask questions of you all, since I have people watching sometimes quite far into these videos that are being wonderful and commenting. And I probably should have actually written down a question, but I guess I'll keep it a bit basic as we wind down the Soldiers arc and begin the Seekers arc. I know it's perhaps a bit premature given we only have the overture and then just the Soldiers table so far, but what table do you find yourself most excited for? Or to delve a little bit more into? Is it waiting with bated breath to circle back to the Soldiers table and continue on with this? Are you interested in finding out whatever the Seekers are going to discover about the lore of the gods and the primordials and the schemes of the Daconis family? Or are you waiting to get back to the political intrigue and the we don't have a lot of time? Like, this is not going to be a slow political intrigue with the Schemers, which may help me with it a bit much, because it's interesting, but slow burn stuff isn't always my cup of tea. So the idea of, like, we've got to do political intrigue, so we've got to be careful, but also we don't have a lot of time, so we do have to take some risks, will be very interesting. But I think right now, just, if you can't tell from the sort of things I write down my notes about to talk about in this video, I think Seekers Table is going to be my personal favorite, but I am frankly excited to see what Brennan and the amazing cast does with all of these. But how about you? What are you most excited for? Yeah, just let me know in the comments below. And yeah, hopefully by next video I will have a complete pincushion to kick off the Seekers arc. To show off. Hopefully I find the right buttons on Saturday. Alright. Well, bye y'all.